Robert E. Lee didn't know it yet, but it was to be the last Confederate offensive thrust. It was early spring, 1865, the end of a long, cruel winter, and Lee was desperate. 4 years of brutal warfare had left the Southern Army of Northern Virginia a mere shadow of its former self. Gone were the heroes who had given the youthful Confederacy such hope. The mighty Stonewall Jackson, whose lightning strikes had so characterized the early war years, killed tragically and accidentally by his own men 2 years earlier. The dashing Jeb Stuart, a symbol of the Cavalier horsemen of the South, whose superiority over the Union cavalry had been legendary, but was now only legend. Beside the graves of these and other Southern leaders were the graves of countless thousands who had fallen with them. An entire generation of men and boys who had come to be admired as the finest light infantry in the world. Now they lay beneath the soil of a country they had tried to create, and the South had none to replace them. Gone, too, were the bungling and inept Union leaders whose incompetence had contributed in large measure to the length and cost of this war. Gone was the timid McClellan, afraid to commit his men to battle. The blundering Burnside, who butchered thousands in useless assaults at Fredericksburg. And the pompous Pope, whose foolish arrogance had nearly destroyed a Federal army and had given Lee his first invasion opportunity. These men had been replaced by a new breed of Union general, men who were not afraid to fight and who knew how to win. The enigmatic Ulysses S. Grant brought a long string of victories in Tennessee and Mississippi with him to Virginia. The garrulous William Tecumseh Sherman, whose ruthless march to the sea had torn out the very heart of the Confederacy. And the hard-driving Philip Henry Sheridan, cavalry leader extraordinaire, whose conquest of the Shenandoah Valley had left the garden spot of the South a smoking ruin. These were the new warriors who marched at the head of an almost limitless legion of Yankee soldiers. They did not make the mistakes that their predecessors had, and now, after a year of costly and relentless combat, they had hammered the Confederacy to its knees, and Lee was desperate. In North Carolina, Confederate General Joseph Johnston was facing Sherman with an army made up of conscripts, remnants, and raw recruits. Though hardly first-line troops, still it was an army. And Lee reasoned that if he could slip the net that Grant and Sheridan were slowly tightening around Richmond and Petersburg, he just might be able to join up with Johnston and turn his combined forces on Sherman before Grant could come to his aid. He could then deal with Grant separately. A bold plan, to be sure, but Lee was desperate. The first step in the plan was an attack on Fort Stedman, which was in the center of the Yankee line. This Lee hoped would draw off Union troops from the south of Petersburg, opening the way for him to march to Carolina. It began well enough. 3 columns of rebel soldiers surprised the Yankee defenders of the fort, overwhelmed them, and captured several hundred yards of trenches on either side. But the early morning attack quickly lost steam. Union troops recovered, counterattacked, and recaptured the fort. Lee had failed, and never again would the Confederacy mount an offensive of any size. A week later, Grant launched an offensive of his own, which had a very different outcome. In keeping with his strategy of extending his left flank to encircle Petersburg, Grant sent Philip Sheridan with a combined force of infantry and cavalry to the area of Dinwiddie Courthouse. Grant knew that Lee could not continue to stretch his thin forces to meet these thrusts, and that sooner or later his lines must break. Lee sent General George Pickett, who will forever wear the mantle of that gallant charge at Gettysburg, to confront Sheridan. The two forces slugged it out near Five Forks, some miles southwest of Petersburg. Pickett was quickly outflanked by Warren's 5th Corps and his lines broken. The Battle of Five Forks was not really a contest over the crossroads by that name, but more a struggle for the control of the South Side Railroad. This was Lee's only remaining rail supply line, and control of it was crucial to both sides. Union forces astride this vital artery would be in a perfect position to penetrate to the rear of the Southern defenses, rendering their position untenable. Five Forks destroyed Pickett's division, with 3,000 Confederates ending up as Yankee prisoners. This was a defeat of major proportions, and one the Southern Army could not afford. The next day, April 2nd, 1865, Union troops broke through Lee's overextended lines, and the defense of Richmond became an impossibility. The next campaign of the Army of Northern Virginia would be their last. Lee's plan was not complicated, and if he moved fast enough, a quality for which his men were well known, it held some promise. Troops from Richmond and Petersburg would consolidate at Amelia Courthouse, take on supplies for the march south, and move quickly to Johnston, and the last best hope of the Confederacy. But where fortune had smiled on Robert E. Lee so many times before, she turned her back on him now. The supplies never arrived at Amelia Courthouse, and Lee's men were forced to waste an entire day foraging a ravaged countryside looking for food. This delay gave the Union cavalry time to block the road south. Lee was now forced to turn west towards Farmville in hopes of skirting around the roadblock and picking up his original line of march south somewhere else. What followed next is a classic case of the fox and the hounds. The Confederates were weary but hopeful. They had eluded the Yankees before with Jackson in the Valley, and again during the Second Manassas campaign against Pope. Many of them had come to believe in the almost godlike ability of Lee to snatch impossible victory from almost certain defeat.
We've always whipped them before, just we've always had to pull back because there's just more of them behind us than there are in front of us.
I don't know. We can still break through, I think. Farmville's supposed to have some supplies. The train's supposed to be coming along, so I think we'll do all right. Yeah.
We're still trying to hold together for our leader. General Lee is doing the best he can, and we're gonna fight behind him all the way. But it just seems like a hopeless battle now. Especially since we're on a retreat so much. We could just turn around and win something. I think it would be a big boost.
We have faith in our leaders, and General Lee will see us through.
We're gonna give these damn Yankees a surprise. They ain't gonna forget for a while. Oh, Bob Lee, he's smart now. We might lick these guys yet.
Beneath the optimism and determination to fight to the end, there resided deep inside these brave men a sense of tragic loss, a sense that they were losing more than just the war. They were losing their homes, their country, their way of life, and even their future. In short, everything. It was a feeling as universal as it was individual, and it was inescapable.
We had 4 cousins killed, but there's no one left.
You know, I got a letter from home the other day, and ain't much left there. They're as hungry as we are. Yankees burnt out all the fields and stole all the livestock. And you start worrying about your family, and you want to go home and protect your children and your wife, and what's left of it.
Live close at hand with death every day like we do. That you just try not to think about it.
We had a small tobacco farm. The Yanks come here, found out, that I was a Southerner, and they burned the farm down.
We can't even raise 30, 40 men every morning. Every morning there's less, so, some of them going home, some of them just going, I guess.
Tired of it.
Tired of it.
And so the race was on, for Lee and his generals Longstreet, Ewell, Anderson, and Gordon. The goal was the Richmond and Danville Railroad, whose tracks led to the Carolinas. The best possibility seemed to be in the area of Farmville, and a crossroads that lay just on the other side of a muddy little stream that cut through the Virginia farmland with timeless anonymity. Very soon, the wheels that had been set in motion 4 years ago in Charleston Harbor would roll painfully over the meandering brook called Sayler's Creek. The Confederate marching order placed General Longstreet at the head of the column, followed by Richard Anderson, followed by Richard Stoddard Ewell, successor to Stonewall, known to his men as Baldy Pete, and often blamed for the failure of the Confederates to win decisively the Battle of Gettysburg on the first day. Now in command of the center of the column, he was to become the principal player in the unfolding drama. Behind Ewell were the Confederate wagon trains, guarded by John Gordon's corps, acting as the rear guard. Gordon's men had been fighting a running battle with the Union soldiers of Humphreys' Second Corps, who were nipping constantly at their heels. For the bulk of the army, however, the pursuit was mostly marching, and no one knew when a real fight would break out. Wary Union pickets out in front of the main body probed cautiously for those places where the Confederates might stand and fight. Such encounters rarely lasted long, however, before the superior numbers of the Yankees forced the rebels to continue their withdrawal, often so precipitously that the dead and wounded were left behind. It was not uncommon amidst this savage fighting to witness a demonstration of respect and sympathy for a fallen enemy. For all their differences, these men were all still Americans, and in moments of quiet between the thunderclaps of battle, both sides would often pause to reflect on a common desire, that of being home.
Oh, I had a letter a couple weeks ago. Seems everyone's okay. You know, we're from New Hampshire, and farm's just barely getting on. It's just a small farm, though. But I think we'll manage just because it's almost done now.
Last time we were home was on veteran furlough in '64. That was, well, actually December '63, January '64. Home to Pittsburgh. We were home for 30 days before our regiment got veteran furlough, veteran status. Now we're known as the 116th Pennsylvania Veteran Volunteers, which we're very proud of.
As far as the family's concerned, I have no idea. I ain't heard one from them in the last 4 years, so I have no idea what situation they're in now.
Well, no, I haven't heard from my family in a right good while. We've been moving out so fast that the mail and any kind of correspondence hasn't had a chance to catch up with us. I only pray to God that they're together and haven't been molested by federal troops. I'm anxious to get back there and get the crops planted this spring if this thing will ever get over.
And it would be over, sooner than anyone knew at the time. And the Yankees were doing everything possible to hasten that moment. One item that played a small but significant role in the drama was the introduction of modern firearms.
The damn thing that gets us, though, is those repeating rifles.
Yeah, it's hard to come up against them.
Yeah, you figure one man can shoot 10 times before he
They
reloads.
say load them once and shoot all day.
Just keep on.
Oh, no, this is a Spencer rifle. It's a metallic cartridge rifle, rimfire, breech loading, lever action, and you load 7 56 cartridges through the buttstock, and then you have 7 shots before you have to reload. The horizontal shot tower, they call it.
You know, I watched them horsemen follow us. Remember the squad going out for foraging duty? Came up, 2 horsemen, rode right up there, dismounted, and just bump. Awesome thing I saw, you know.
Well, like I say, I saved a little bit of my bonus money, but this is where some of it went. I figured it was an investment in my future.
The precious few of these new weapons that found their way into Confederate hands were not enough to offset the vast resources the North could bring to bear. And no one was more successful at bringing those resources to bear than Ulysses S. Grant. His pursuit was characteristically vigorous and unrelenting. He was determined to end this conflict quickly now, and there would be no escape for Lee this time. Grant's officers and men sensed that the end was near, although the stubbornness of their enemy's resistance made it hard to believe, and the opinion was not unanimous.
I can't see the war lasting much longer, perhaps another month or so. The rebels we've seen are very dejected. They're hard-pressed for clothing, ammunition. there's not much of the Army left. A lot of it's walking home, breaking up. I can't see it lasting a whole lot longer.
I think the end is very, very close, maybe within months or weeks.
It can't be much longer now, not the way we're going. Not as fast as we've been moving. Not as fast as the Rebs are moving in front of us either. I think it's got to get over soon.
It seems hard to believe that they'll surrender en masse. I think they may carry it into a guerrilla war. It's hard to believe they'll really give up en masse. I see the fighting could last in small pockets for quite a while, even if the main army does surrender.
I can't imagine that. I think we have the advantage. I think that they will have no option than to surrender.
Oh, I don't think they're going to surrender. Not as much as we've pushed them and they just keep going. I just think we're going to push them until there's just no more of them.
That'll be the end of them.
Longstreet's divisions crossed Sailor's Creek and continued on towards Rice's Depot, some 5 miles away. The divisions of Anderson, under the command of Pickett and Johnson, paused long enough to repulse a cavalry attack and turn the Confederate wagon train off on a safer road. Gordon's men, under orders to protect the train, followed. Anderson then crossed the creek and halted. This left Ewell as the rear guard, and the stage was set for the Battle of Sailor's Creek. Hard on the heels of the Confederates at this point was General Horatio Governor Wright and the Union's 6th Corps. Veterans of campaigns east and west, the 6th Corps was arguably the best the Army of the Potomac had to offer. The leading divisions under Truman Seymour and Frank Wheaton soon discovered that Gordon and the trains were gone and that they were now facing Joseph Kershaw's men, who were posted near the Hillsman farm and spoiling for a fight. Spreading out, Truman's and Seymour's brigades pressed forward to make contact with the Mississippians.
We got our colonel, man.
As the fighting intensified, a trickle of men streamed to the rear, helping wounded comrades or just leaving. This grew to a steady flow, and gradually Kershaw began to fall back over the creek. The Union advance was a costly one, however, and the skirmishers vowed not to give up the creek easily. Finally, Union troops found a lightly guarded ford and swarmed across, taking the rebels in the flank. Fierce hand-to-hand fighting followed. Ewell, in the meantime, had established a defensive position at the top of a long hill that sloped up from the creek. With his brigades, commanded by Custis Lee, Joseph Kershaw, and a brigade of sailors and Marines under John Randolph Tucker, Ewell prepared to meet the onslaught of the elite troops of Seymour and Wheaton. Union artillery, well placed at the Hillsman House, was unopposed by Confederate guns and played a major role in the attack. After crossing the creek, Union troops formed up at the base of the hill and began their assault. They advanced to within a few yards of the rebel lines, and a strange incident occurred. The Yankee troops, in an apparent effort to encourage the rebels to avoid what they perceived as useless bloodshed, waved white handkerchiefs and appealed to them to surrender. The Confederates' answer was unmistakable. The first volley devastated the Union line, and the following fire swallowed up the remainder, forcing a few survivors to flee back down the hill, some as far as the creek. Rebel soldiers running low on ammunition raced out to raid the cartridge boxes of their fallen enemies. The lull in the fighting was momentary, however. With the artillery at the Hillsman House in full support, the Union lines reformed and moved forward again. This time they would not be stopped and hit the Confederate positions with overpowering strength. Union cavalry appeared on the rebels' flank, and in a few minutes, all resistance ceased. A half a mile away, Anderson's line was assaulted again and again by the Yankee cavalry, with Custer's men finally breaking through. In 36 hours, the Confederate Army had lost 8,000 prisoners and any real chance to effect a juncture with Johnston in Carolina. A few days later, Generals Lee and Grant met in the small Virginia town of Appomattox Courthouse. They sat down in the parlor of a man named Wilmer McLean, a former resident of Manassas, who moved to this remote village after the battle 4 years ago had destroyed his farm. Now it came full circle. What had started in his front yard ended in his parlor. Lee and Grant concluded the surrender of the Army of Northern Virginia, the principal army of the Confederacy. Although it would be 2 more weeks before Johnston gave up the struggle in North Carolina, the fighting was, for all intents and purposes, over. The 26,000 men remaining in Lee's army marched into town and surrendered their arms without shame or regrets. Their courage gave the conquering Yankees pause, and the moment was a moving one.
First platoon.
Although the fighting was over, there remained one more shot to be fired. The great emancipator had lived long enough to see the terrible conflict resolved, the slaves freed forever, and the Union restored. Though the business of building the country into the world power it is today would be for others to do, he had advanced the work nobly. He had cemented the two halves together and provided a foundation upon which all else could build. An unlikely hero, his moment in history was brief, but his impact enormous. Still today, his words ring down through the ages with their power undiminished.
But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men living and dead who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the
chicken fillets, 15 minutes. And last but not least, use the skimmer to keep your shortening fresh and clean. The deep fry station is an important part of the Hardee's breakfast effort. Follow the procedures and you'll be supporting the team with the tastiest hash browns, breakfast steaks, and chicken fillets in the business. In addition to this video, Hardee's also has procedure cards, information sheets, and an operations manual that you can review to learn more about cooking at the deep fry station. Ask your manager where these are located in your restaurant. Stop the tape now and answer the questions on the information sheet titled Breakfast Deep Fry. After you check your answers, rewind the tape.